Welcome to Shhh, the Talk Show Season 3. If you believe in the conversations we're trying to create here, please subscribe to our channels as that will help us get more reach. If you watch the YouTube pre-roll ads before this episode in completion, that also helps us to make a little bit of money that help us to go a long way. Our show is now available in 3 languages, so you can click on your subtitle of choice, whether it's Sinhala, Tamil or English. You can follow this conversation wherever you are in Sri Lanka. And we also welcome you to continue these taboo conversations with us on our social media, which is Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and also our blog posts coming out and our articles in the Sunday morning newspaper. Enjoy the show. We are shooting today's conversation down Flower Road in Colombo 3. It's called Brew 1867 and it's a cafe by Dilma. It's a really nice chilled place to be and have a chat at, and so we are very grateful that they gave us the space and came on board. If there's a taboo that we haven't talked about yet that we should have talked about a long time ago, that is connected to a conversation we have had before, that is sex. Especially in Sri Lanka, the word sex alone is looked at as such a horrible thing that we've been told not to talk about, that our kids don't know enough about, people don't know about their bodily autonomy, they don't know about their sensuality or sexuality. But then what if you take it further and you talk about the subject of sexual kinks? Now that's not just a taboo in Sri Lanka, it's a taboo all over the world. When you say the word sexual fetish or sexual kink, you kind of have this imagery that is created by the Catholic guilt of this dark, doom, sinful kind of mindset, these perverse attitudes, this kind of vile person, like if you talk about someone who engages in sexual fetishes. So I wondered who would be willing to come on this show and talk about sexual kinks and fetishes. There was one name that came to my mind, popped straight into my mind, because he was the first person who was unashamedly open about these topics, who is Suresh. And with Sue, we have Jessica, who is here, and Jessica I'm meeting for the first time. But I'm so grateful to have you, because if it's difficult to find a person in Sri Lanka who's willing to be open and talk about this subject, it's much more difficult to find a woman. Why do we call this a fetish? Why do we call it anything like a fetish? What is it to you?
Okay, the best way to explain this is that people, when it comes to sexuality and sensuality, and when it comes to coitus and their sexual journeys, they would lean towards certain stimulants or certain things that invigorate them, entice them, excite them, get them horny, get them,
and different people have different things that work for them, right?
Because, see, if you really think about it, at the very epicenter and nucleus of what a kink and fetish is, if you're talking about something that really invigorates us and kind of really gives us a sense of empowerment, it's no different than you and I being on stage performing theatre. We love the energy of the audience. I love when I perform with Stigmata, whether I'm performing for 400 people or 40,000 people. For me, the levels of energy are naturally, they vary, it's different, but you feed off that and you feel, you know what I mean, you feel a great deal.
There's a high, there's a buzz.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
and you feel powerful.
And it's that same buzz when you do sports. It's that same buzz when you're in corporate whoredom or the corporate stratosphere, when we are in the creative industry and we have a big presentation or pitch and we nail it on top of all the other guys who are pitching it. That high that you feel, that lightning
adrenaline
in a
rush.
bottle, that adrenaline rush, sometimes is encapsulated with different sentiments and feelings. Society has kind of brainwashed us, especially Sri Lankan society, with regards to what it condones, regards to what it condemns. I mean, it chastises anything that it does not understand.
Yeah, I mean, in Sri Lankan society, you get pregnant if you hold hands with someone, right? That's how. That's the kind of conditioning.
It's a bit better than looking at someone and getting them pregnant.
Yeah.
So, but over here, that's the thing, and it's funny, right? Because a lot of these people who like shout and scream unless they've taken like a religious oath, why do they like drink tinkiri and make babies? Like when they get into relationships, like what do? Aturu mituru ka? No, the whole freaking time they engage, right? They do stuff. So it's the same thing. See, it's a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
Right and wrong is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It's also the same coin with two sides. So it's subjective. It's what you look at. There might be something that turns me on that completely freaks someone else out. There can be something that obviously, I mean, take Thai over here. I mean, he's obviously turned on by a lot of different things. But
we're putting that in the show.
we're putting that in the show.
Thai, our videographer, is turned on by a lot of different
stuff.
Oh, this I have to tell you this though, like segue and digress for a bit. So when we were having a pre-production meeting, we called Thai to come on, and on the phone, Thai was like, "Okay, guys, I'm sorry, I'm late for the meeting and stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, we're talking about sexual fetishes and kinks," and then apparently he's had his 7-year-old daughter next to him who has said, "Tati, what is sexual kinks?" So I don't know how he's dealt with that. But this is also like, how is society going to deal with this, right?
Communication and conversation, touching upon the fact that for you to know what you like and you don't like, you need to have first explored your body. And that's one thing people don't do. People, you know, I've had friends who always spoke about like, "Oh, I've never masturbated." And I'm like, what? Like, how could you have never masturbated? And then like in their 30s.
Yeah.
You don't know your own body. If you don't know your own body, there's no way that you could really connect with another person.
Yeah.
You know, so conversation is what matters, and that's something that doesn't happen in Sri Lanka. People are like, you know, "Oh, don't talk about stuff like that." They can talk about normal like coitus and all that, but when it goes into like fetishes, in terms of not even fetish, I don't like using that word also because it's another word
So actually,
right?
Jessica, you're right, because yesterday I spoke to a male friend. He also said, "I don't like the word fetish. I prefer the word kink because fetish kind of makes it very dark and violent and
connotation,
right?
Because how it's been used in history, you know, like it's like there's a lot of words that I don't agree with on the English language just because people have made it so, you know, created this sort of thing.
But fetishism is again, I don't know how to call it abnormal, even though that's what society says.
It's like this. It's like how somebody would say, you know, how you have these foot fetishes and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that means your pressure point where you get stimulated sexually is on your toe. So it depends on where the sensory points are, and for each individual the sensory points are different.
Different places.
Okay.
So that's why it's important.
Oh, so I thought a foot fetish is where you like somebody else's feet, like your partner's feet turn you on.
That is also there, but they also have this thing where you like somebody touching your foot, like you like somebody.
Okay. Because there's a huge community on social media and on the internet, maybe Google, in Sri Lanka, there are pages for foot fetishes, which we didn't know until we started researching the show.
One is that you like another person's, you know, you get turned on by that, but then also you know, want somebody else to be, you know, there.
Right.
Going off at your foot, doing whatever it is that you want somebody else to do.
Yeah.
So it's both ways, and so it comes.
And it's your foot. It's your right? Foot. So it's nobody else's business, right?
Exactly. So
yeah.
It comes down to, do you know yourself? Do you know your body? Do you know what makes you, you know?
Become someone else's business, I suppose, when your foot crosses that threshold.
Yes.
But that's talking about completely different things.
No, but then again, this okay. So let's discuss. Okay, this concept of crossing a threshold.
Yeah.
Now, if it's two consensual partners, right? For instance, like BDSM. Okay. Now, BDSM has been put into my mind by my my childhood and those who raised me as this violent, sinful, absolute demonic kind of activity on mainstream media also, the way it's portrayed in movies and all that, it's all about, you know, Satan worshipping kind of looking things, right? And tools of violence. You're looking at whips and there's all sorts of things, right? Now, so immediately you look at it as that's going over a threshold. That's stepping over a boundary, and therefore it should not be allowed because it kind of it symbolizes violence.
People are hooked on stuff like MMA, right? And UFC.
Extreme sport.
Extreme sports. Look at that. But what is it that draws people towards it? They're fine watching
boxing match.
Boxing, or take rugby, or take the NFL, take ice hockey, take which we don't have here, but I'm just trying to make a point.
Yeah.
The damage that these people do to their bodies physically, and the huge psychological trauma and strain that they have as a result of being professional sportsmen is colossal.
Yeah.
So people need to understand to separate the art form from the artist. And also, like you mentioned, it is a complete subjective and personal and private affair. What people choose to do, what turns them on with regards to this. Now, with regards to BDSM, okay, for people who don't know, I think the biggest mistake what happens is people in Sri Lanka just go on to Pornhub and porn sites, and like they just go randomly to like these erotica sites that they don't understand. First of all, pornography and erotica are two entirely different worlds. One is to deal with kinks and fetishes and a certain artistry and a spiritual aspect, which is erotica. Pornography, I don't condemn it. It's even from the time I was a kid, when I was in school, I thought I was really, really weird, because while the rest of my friends were watching porn, like it did nothing for me. And you grow, when you grow up at that age where you're doing sports and all, and kids are looking at porn magazines and they're looking at porn flicks and all, and when you're not interested, the first thing that kids start to think is, okay, this one is definitely batting not only for the other team, he's playing a different sport. Right? So and see, those of us born in the 80s, we're very lucky because the advent of technology happened where we got to live through a lot of different progressions of that evolutionary chain.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of self-learning that we had to do. Especially in Sri Lanka, there was no one that you could go to and say, listen, so now I get turned on when I see people in leather and latex. You think there's something wrong with
Can
me?
I stop you there?
Yes.
How did you realize that you were into this lifestyle? And I'm more interested in knowing how you manage that, because as a girl, again, as a boy, this whole world of porn and this and that, it's kind of a normalcy, right? And they're sharing all this stuff with each other, and you're being exposed to that world. But as a girl, you're kind of sheltered from all of that. So how did you realize that, okay, you have certain sexual preferences, certain things excite you, and how did you kind of come to this stage where you were comfortable with exploring it?
I think I was always comfortable with exploring my sexuality.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's more than that. It's a matter of, like I said, it came down to knowing my own body, and you need to be comfortable with your body. You need to be comfortable with how you look, how you seem, because this is something, again, people would have the problem with, how you perceive yourself. And for me, I perceive myself as, like he knows I call myself a goddess and all that, so I do that. Like, that's who I am. But in terms of, see, BDSM, all these things were introduced later in terms of knowing the terms and all that. But you always know, for instance, your body has sensory points. And then, for instance, I knew when somebody would choke me, that would elevate the orgasm. Why? Why is it physiology-wise? Why is it elevating the orgasm? Because what do you do when you choke and all that? Bloodstream, everything gets focused onto a certain point. And that brings out the level of orgasm while me masturbating versus when somebody's choking or giving me a slap on the face or something like that is different. But I think exploration of that point came in towards my 20s, but obviously even before that, like I watched porn and stuff like that, I was exposed to all of that because I'm a very curious cat in that sense. Like I don't just take the world as it is. I want to know why it is the way it is, and he knows this. Like I ask the hard questions, and I won't just take your answer for it. I want to go and experience it. I believe in knowing life through experience.
That's also kinky, actually.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So for me,
Actually,
it is because I mean, so he knows the spiritual aspect that I bring. So all of this sort of started in my 20s itself when and the thing is, even with previous partners, there are some partners that I wasn't vocal about certain things because for me, I first get to know them. Because I know myself. I know what I like. I know what I...
Yeah, but when did you realize you liked being choked or whatever it was?
I didn't have a realization per se, but it's always been there.
Okay.
Like if a guy did something and you know, I thought it was hot, I'd be like, okay, do it again.
Okay.
That sort of thing, you know. It comes through experience, so you won't get experience about yourself and life and sex if you have not had sex with people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay, so when this happened, I just want to know, like, did it ever feel wrong?
No.
The first few times at least?
No, it didn't. Like I said, it comes back down to what makes you feel good. If I felt like it was in a way that at any point, if I felt like, okay, I don't want this, I'm not comfortable with this, I was vocal about it, like I'd say.
But is it to say that, okay, your childhood was not as repressive as most of ours, where you're taught that something is wrong?
No, so the thing is now, you know, coming from a Catholic background,
Yeah.
I don't follow religion,
Yeah.
but coming from that background and coming from, you know, a very, because my mom's Sinhala, you know, that side, and so that sort of environment, and then, you know, in school I remember the subject when we had to learn about the sexual reproductive system.
Yeah, they just skip the chapter, no? Yeah.
Read this by yourself and understand, and I'm like, what? That was the chapter everybody was waiting for, because you'd rather hear it like coming from a lady who's experienced and who has children and who knows about life than having to go and find it out from an internet or some newspaper, magazine, or article, or some person who's going to tell you stuff that might not be the actual truth about things. So that sort of, again, so in Sri Lanka, I think a lot of girls have to find out for themselves a lot of things, and that's why if they get into relationships where the male partner would try to force upon them or do things or tell, do try this or try that, and they don't know more about themselves,
It can be traumatizing.
it can be.
that's why it's very important, and you need to emphasize this. It needs to be consensual and contextual, both those things, at all times.
Did you ever feel like when you first started, when you first got into this, when you first realized, okay, I like leather, I like, what is it that you like? I don't know.
Technically speaking, I stumbled upon my first dominatrix by accident in this country. She was 6 years older than me. I was about 21, 22.
Okay.
Obviously the band had started, the band was doing pretty alright. I thought that I was hot shit in the bedroom. I had no idea what was.
Okay.
I realized after that I couldn't tell a tablespoon from my own elbow.
Okay.
So like what happened was she was into like shibari and kimbaku and stuff. So this is Japanese bondage.
Yeah, the tying up stuff, right?
So I had certain, how shall we say this, I went over to a place. I mean, first few times it was alright, it was like normal, and then she was like, you know, I'm going to, we didn't so much as have a dialogue as she was like, I'm just gonna do stuff. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And I was like, yeah, it's okay. So like ice, candle wax, small things like that. And then like the bondage would start, and then I wouldn't know what the hell is going on.
So the pain excited you, was it?
This is what people need to understand. It's not just the pain and like pressure that is caused that excites, it's the balance between pain and pleasure. And this is what all these lick-spittle morons that read and watch 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Shit, I call it.
Shades of shit, really.
Yeah.
That's not how. That was a mockery. See, 50 Shades of Grey did to our community what Twilight did for vampires.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
So like you can
And
see
that-
you can see the anger, apathy on my
Yeah,
face.
but I mean, not that I know anything about comparing BDSM, but in terms of literature, I think 50 Shades of Grey is
No, it's bad.
50 Shades of Grey is the only thing that's not better than Twilight.
So we explored certain things, or rather, she exploited and explored me. And
But consensually. But were you trying to run away?
I couldn't technically.
Oh, okay. You were tied up.
Yes.
Okay.
So here's the thing. Obviously, I realized at some point that she was a young cougar sort who used to do this to young boys and young girls, because in our thing we are generally open about our sexuality and we're bi. I lean more heavily towards the heterosexual thing. I don't judge people who that for both teams. That's completely fine. I know a lot of people who do. I've been with people who do also. But for me, that was an interesting experience because see, that's kind of where the triggers, I was able to identify the triggers. Until that point, it's like I had throughout my life collected bits and pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And I did not know how to put it together, and I also did not understand what the holistic picture was once it was brought together. I did not understand that. So my ability to comprehend that happened after a few experiences with her. But it was very interesting because there was a transition of power play and role playing that happened, that after a while she gave me the reins and wanted me to do the same thing. So in a way, while she was subjugating me to this experience, after a while she was kind of in a very indirect way giving me not so much of a crash course, but training me in the arts of becoming a dominus also.
Okay.
So that was 21, 22, right? So to answer your question, before that I didn't know. I would stumble upon certain things and I would think, oh wow, this is doing some weird thing to me. It's nice, but I couldn't really trace all the breadcrumbs.
Could you like reconcile with it? As in, yes, you liked it, but did it ever leave you confused?
Oh, of course, it left me confused. When you're a teenager and like, you know, very specific things that you watch that turn you on, and you're like, you know, whips and flogs and leather and chains and, you know, rope and all this stuff. You're thinking, okay, I need to find out more, but what can I do? I can't go to the National Archives or the National Library. I can't go to like Vijitayapa bookshop and sit in the bookshop and start digging for like all stuff. So what you do is you try to kind of put the pieces together and find like-minded people. So
where do you find like-minded people?
I was lucky because there is a certain connection and acceptance for disenfranchised people and misfits among the rock and heavy metal community. And it was a much smaller based community back in the day. So when we connected with the music, we also connected with the literature and the art and certain aspects of theater, and that was where we also connected, where we start to discuss and talk about these things. So when you're dating someone at that point, it's full of trial and error. It's almost cute when you look back at it or not, but you try to discover each other and discover things that work for you and don't work for you through mutual experience. So sometimes it doesn't work at all, and sometimes it works, and then you think, okay, I kind of enjoyed that, you enjoyed that too, can we try that again, but maybe take it to the next level. So like I said, self-learning was like a big thing, but it was only much later in my mid-20s that I realized that there is a total community of people over here who are into this.
Because I wanted people to know that not to treat this as some sort of depraved thing where it can lead young people, maybe people who are sort of experiencing sexual things for the first time, if they're excited by certain things, that they feel that there's something wrong with them. That they feel that because they're taught to believe that there's something mentally wrong with them, and that can really traumatize a person, right? That self infliction of I'm a loser, I'm a worthless, I'm depraved, I'm this and that, right?
You go to the extent where you think that you're abnormal you know.
Yeah.
So therefore you find it hard to connect with people also, because you won't even talk about, you know, your
Yeah.
you know, your desires and things like that, because it's because in some relationship somebody might shut you down and be like, you're weird.
And that's
You're
why it's
weird.
shot to hell, because
Yeah.
the thing is they keep it inside and bottled up so much that finally they try to bring it all out
Yeah.
and experiment with this stuff with their partners.
Yeah.
And it might be a totally vanilla individual.
Yes.
And here this person takes out the flog and takes out the will, they're like, oh my god, I'm dating a serial killer.
Yeah. And then people say to
So have-
talk about stuff like that. They'll go around and say, oh, did you know this person is like this?
Can I ask you, like, now, because you're so open about it, have you ever intimidated people with the fact that, like, have you found that, okay, if you like someone, they run away from you because they think you're too
It's
intense,
different for
too
women.
much?
I'll say it's different for women to a certain degree, because of the fact that whether you are a submissive or a dominus in terms of a woman, if you find a man who likes that kind of thing, great. But even then, you can switch between being a submissive as well.
How do you find a man who likes that kind of thing? How do you have that conversation with someone like,
See, overall,
do you like this?
I think overall for women, it's not so hard as much
Okay.
as it's for men. And this is why I have great respect for men in terms of it's so hard for them
to actually
to
come
have the
forward and say
conversation
it?
and talk about stuff, because for women, I mean, for a man just finding a woman who's okay for anything under the sun is be like, I'm a dude. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, wow. So I've never had a problem with that.
Okay.
But that's why I have more great respect.
But
for
I
men,
mean,
because I know
do
it's
you
very hard.
do you ever approach men with the question?
No,
Or-
so I don't see. Generally, how it happens is you at a conversation level. So in the obviously in my teens and 20s and all that would have been. It's just, you know, during uni days and stuff, you just go out for a drink or you pick up a guy or something like that, and that sort of veers into whatever happens. But later on, like, I mean, even with us, it was a conversation we had from the beginning, you know, like, because that's part of being an adult as well. When you come to a certain age, you should have that conversation.
Yeah.
You should be like, these are the kind of things that I like.
We didn't identify one thing. So BDSM is bondage and it's discipline. It's domination, it's submission, it's sadism, and it's masochism, and it's sadomasochism. It is, like we said, a consensual, contextual, exotic, sometimes erotic form of engaging with someone else and interacting with someone else physically, sometimes emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, right? Which involves, yes, kinks and fetishes, but it involves role playing, it involves an exchange of power, it has a lot of other elements and aspects to it. It's actually quite a transcendental, transient experience for people. So it's not just like one element. People see like one element, they just see BDSM and they're like, okay, I watched a Korean horror movie and I've seen what happens in a fetish club and like, oh my god, that's not for me. It's not how it works. So see, being turned on by rubber and latex and leather is also a fetish and a kink. Like the way it feels against your skin. Most of you ladies know that. You pick certain fabrics and materials, you guys go crazy over your shoes and shit, right? Why? Not just chasing after certain brands, but what is it
the
about
lace
the
and the satin and all. Yeah,
the
right.
comfort and the luxury and the way it makes you feel. It makes you feel a certain way. This is the same thing.
Yeah.
So now this is very interesting. If you look up, findings will show you that after the global pandemic hit, that the top fetishes and kinks in the world, obviously virtual sex shot to number one, right? And then amongst partners, they were exploring the sadomasochism aspect, the domination submission aspect. Bondage became a very, very popular thing that they were willing to explore and try out. And then basic fetishes and stuff and kinks that they would try out. So now see, sensory deprivation is something that has not only scientifically proven to actually have merit and benefits for people, because when you feel or you give unto someone a sense of pain or pleasure or pressure or warmth, certain organs would react to it in very, very different ways. So sensory deprivation is when you take away a person, one of their senses, the remaining senses would
Heighten.
work 10 times hard to compensate for that because it's heightened. So there's a huge
But outside sexual kinks, it's like sensory deprivation is used for healing processes and all
Correct.
that as well,
Correct.
right? Like
And
those
this-
chambers, those
Of course.
silent chambers and this
Of
and that.
course.
Yeah.
So like this goes to like shamanic monks, and it goes all the way back to, like you said, like from certain pagan rituals to early tribal stuff. It's always been there. It's always been indoctrinated and inculcated into our collective consciousness. Just that the overall collective consciousness has been warped after, you know, the
Victorians came.
Victorians came and like all of that. And it's really ironic, you know, that the Catholic Church has gone a little bit bonkers over things when things like self-flagellation,
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
Self-mortification and spiritual deprivation are things that they have condoned publicly in some cultures. They still do this. People are still crucified and taken on roads in parts around the world, right? So here you're not hurting anyone. The objective is not to break a person's skin or to make someone bleed or to make
to take
someone
revenge on
or to
someone.
take revenge or
Not that.
retribution or to make someone feel small or demeaned or demoralized. Not at all. In fact, if you speak to most people who say that they're submissives, they will say that they feel a far greater degree of power in relinquishing and letting go of their level of power than enforcing it on towards someone else.
okay.
So-
So are you more into domination or
So I
submission?
switch between depending on the situation itself. But for me, like I told him, why it happens where I take submissive roles more, you know, in my previous relationships as well, is because I'm such a powerful character outside the bedroom. So I demand, I command power. So because of that, for me, it's such a good balance that in the bedroom
You just
and all that,
let go.
and I can get somebody else. So it's a level of discipline as well in how you conduct yourself, you know, because it helps you to understand your thresholds as well, how far you can push yourself to.
Your limits, your
Limits.
posture, your control.
All of
Is there anything that you wouldn't do?
Yeah, of course, there are plenty of things even I would.
yeah, we won't cut each other or like do stuff like that because there's no.
Yeah,
I mean,
I've been with people who like blood.
yeah,
That's not my thing at all.
There's, I think.
It's a bit nuts.
But you also have like some kinks or fetishes are like where somebody wants to be belittled, somebody wants to be.
So that all comes down to again what that partner wants, and that's why I said that conversation needs to happen at that degree. But then people, even for the viewers that are watching and those who might be considering it even with their partners, it's very important to have that conversation and understand first of all where your bodies are at. You know, because if you got somebody who's got back problems or who has, you know, let's say reflexive, you know, problems or something like that, last thing you want to do is get into a situation where you might like choke to death or something. So you don't want to do that. That's why it's so important to know your
What are the
physiology,
limits?
like, you know, what works for you, and then work around with that with your partner.
Have you had any sort of extreme incidences like accidents or?
No, not yet. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, okay,
I was
so
thinking what an odd moment to reach out for your juice.
no, but I'll bring it back to what Suresh was talking about, the spiritual aspect of it. I'll bring it back to that because even for the ones who are watching, they should understand that what this does is it helps you understand your body a little bit more, but it also helps you understand how your energy levels are working as well. And in terms of history, how it comes down to is every religion has it. Every religion has it. And that starts because every religion is, because I'm a spiritual person, so every religion is a base of paganism. Paganism has been taken, diluted, and, you know, turned around, and Christianity came, then Islam, and then Hinduism has been there way before that. But even today, Hinduism still does a lot to do with what we would call fetish, but they do it for spiritual reasons, from the hooks, walking on, you know, coal. And then in the Catholics and all that, they go on pilgrimage where they kneel and then they climb the steps. What are all these points? These are pain, right? This is pain, that you're feeling this pain, but
to reach a heightened, elevated sense of being.
because that's when you connect to God part, like the God level is connected to where you connected to divinity.
Correct.
Because divinity can take pain, right? So you find the divinity within yourself in finding that pain.
No, and you elevate as human beings. We elevate to a heightened state much faster through pain than we do through pleasure. That is why when you combine the two, it's ecstatic.
Ecstatic. Like there's studies, there's journal articles. If anybody wants to read up on the internet, just go BDSM and spirituality. There's a much more interest in all of this now, so it's almost like you're going back to our pagan roots.
It's like how people watch wrestling. We loved wrestling as kids. Being a young boy growing up watching wrestling, right? And then you try to replicate this thing with like your friends and they say don't do it at home. It's really dangerous. So like you don't watch movies and you don't watch, and we've all done it. We watch kung fu movies and stuff when we're small and we try to beat the hell out of each other. We watch Mortal Kombat. We grew up on games like Mortal Kombat and stuff, right? But the same thing with this. People need to understand that when it comes to porn and when it comes to erotica, these are professional actors, actresses. There are script writers. It's like you guys. You have tons of people behind the scenes. There are producers. There are directors. There are editors.
And shot within that time frame of 1 hour, 2 hours.
People watch a 1 hour.
But I think even the way the art is depicted might be then wrong, because now that is the frame of reference that I have is what the media has shown, right?
Correct.
So then you look at it as a point of view of there is a person being victimized, there is a person being tied up, cut, slapped, whatever is happening, it's shocking and it's traumatic to watch. Okay. So maybe some people get excited by it and that's why there's a market for it, but that might not be exactly what it is.
It's not. No, it's not that. And it comes back to what I said before. I mean, most of us who are what we call horror heads grew up on horror. We don't finish watching a horror movie and come out thinking, I want to go and chop someone up.
Yeah.
Because like values and virtue are instilled in us at our homes, at our schools, at the basic levels of society. This is where education and this is where imparting knowledge and learning has to actually happen. The more you say things are taboo and stigmas, the more kids are gonna just check it out. That's the absolute truth. Because the one thing any kid would love to do is to do the exact opposite of what they're told not to do. So I think these conversations need to happen. I think it's very important that you are, I think, a very rare person in this country who's...
And you call me Mother Superior sometimes, huh? You call me Mother Superior sometimes.
That's because you look good in a habit, but that's a conversation for another day.
No, deeply inappropriate now. This is a conversation you and I are going to have where I'm going to say, I am not comfortable with that. Don't Is it a deal breaker if you have a partner who's not into it, but can you love someone who is not into the lifestyle?
Yes.
You can.
But difficult.
Because you're then deprived of something.
No. You need to understand as human beings.
It's like having a vehicle that doesn't really run.
Not just that, sex is an integral part of your, when it comes down to like this, you can't take sex out of the equation of a good solid relationship. It's a very integral part of a relationship. And if you and two people cannot connect in that sense, there is going to be a problem. Let's say a guy and girl, let's say everything else is great and you're like, yes, we are together and everything's fine, vanilla sex is there and all of that is there. More than likely, because we are human beings, that is how we are made, more than likely they would go out of that relationship for other necessities. They would still be in the relationship to everybody, to society, be the best father, best mother in the world, kids grow up beautifully. But they would find that outlet somewhere else if they don't find it, because if they don't find that outlet, that comes into the relationship in terms of, if you're not sexually satisfied, you bring that down into the relationship itself. Like I said, in marriage itself, it's so important. I know they say like don't have sex before marriage and all that nonsense. These are things again that has been brought down by religion, because religion was needed for society, for civilization to progress and go forward. So I don't negate that. Even today, religion is needed for children and all that to grow up with that sort of context. But when you become an adult, in your teen years, you should be able to explore yourself, ask those questions from your parents even. You know, your teacher should be able to explain certain things to you. These things should be taught so that you would feel comfortable and you would know enough to have a conversation with a partner. And say, look, you know, and then even if you both don't know much about it, you can both try things out together. You can have your safe words and say, you know, why don't we try something small?
So safe words are just for people who don't know.
Two people, you know, just
That is like when you're going over a limit.
Your threshold is coming up, and you know, okay, let's
You can't take it anymore.
You can't take it anymore, and you give that, you know.
Have you ever been in a situation where your safe word hasn't been respected?
Not for me.
Well, sometimes when you're gagged, you can't.
Well, you can't,
You can't mention a.
How do you do that then? Do you have a sign?
No, there are signs. Then
Signs,
signs.
yes.
Right?
You can tap
What?
out. You can tap
Okay.
out, or you can do different stuff.
But where can a person go for information if they were curious about it, if they felt like, okay, I want to know more? Because this is not talked about.
That's a big problem.
Because this community is always so secretive.
So this is one of the revolutionary starting points, I think, in Sri Lankan history, where someone is willing to talk about this stuff on an open forum and on social media, where this is going to be disseminated and a lot of people are going to see this and hear about it. And yes, it's going to twist a lot of panties out there and underwear, but at the same time there are people who are going to be like, okay, wow, so this is interesting. Listen, there's nothing wrong with people who are into this. There
Yeah.
are people who are completely emotionally held together. There are people who are psychologically stable. There are people with good jobs, good careers, good sound academic qualifications, professional qualifications, families who are into this thing, which is sometimes why they
It's a
wouldn't
personal
want to,
preference.
where they wouldn't want to come out in the open because they will be judged by family, relatives, and that's the worst.
Now
in this
that's
country.
bringing me to one of my final questions is, what has it cost you in this society? Have you felt like you have to hide who you are
No.
just to make it in life?
No, because
Okay.
for me, no, because I've always been castigated and chastised from the time I was young, being a dude who was into rock and roll and heavy metal in a time period where that was not an accepted norm. There was no greater taboo in Sri Lanka in the 90s or the early 2000s than to say you're a kid who wants to play in a band. That was a no-no to your families. But then to say you want to play in a rock band was worse, and a couple of notches worse than that, like actually proper south of heaven, was to say you want to play in a metal band.
And for girls, I would especially say, be authentic, be transparent. What are you hiding about? You know, like, because for me, what happens is when you hide yourself, you hide your true authentic self. You meet people, corporate level also, you engage with people. And then after a while, they'll hear some stories like, you know, here and there, like, oh, but she's not like that, and she's like this, no. So you're creating multiple personalities with different spheres. So there's no real authentic you. In that process, what you're doing is you're losing yourself. You don't know who you are because you're one to your parents, you're one to your partner, you're somebody else to your corporate sphere, somebody else to your girlfriends.
Yeah.
It's high time people own up to who they are and be proud about it. If you're born as a human being and not a gona eating tanapal on the road, act like a human being with intelligence. You have intelligence to gauge and, you know, think about great things. So why act like a guna? Like, I don't understand this about society, right?
Is there anything that you would say is abnormal and not okay? As in something you don't do, but there are fetishes and kinks out there that you don't think are.
It's not normal to blackmail people.
Yeah.
It's not okay to coerce and force someone to do something that they're not comfortable with. We're all different, and that's what makes the world go round. It's fine. There are people who are into vanilla, there are people who are into chocolate, and there are people who are into whiskey, and there are people who are into other things. But the important thing is, on one hand, we should not, in this entire spectrum, we should not judge someone else for, it's not a shortcoming, a person's kinks or fetishes. You have to stop thinking of it as a kink and fetish, and you need to start thinking of it as a want and a need. Then I think when you replace those words, and then when you replace the monikers with that particular ritual and practice, it will change the entire scenario. Also, you have to have the right setting, the right situation, the right environment. Both have to be in the same mindset. I hate doing stuff when I'm too inebriated or intoxicated. I don't mind a couple of glasses of wine, or I don't mind being a little bit tipsy and then having coitus, but I don't encourage, and it's not okay for people to manipulate and exploit someone else after getting them
Drunk.
too intoxicated. That is not on. That's not on for anything, not even with basic harassment and engagement, anything. It's not. Harassment of any kind should not be allowed, it should not be accepted, it should not be condoned. We see a lot of these things happening with bosses in organizations, with their PAs and with their secretaries, and not just men. It happens with plenty of women today, where CEOs and top brass in the country exploit and they really make use of people working under them. And again, I'm not talking about just straight sex couples either. I'm talking across the board this happens, even in the LGBTQ community. So the only way to accept truth is in order to first identify and conquer and accept that these are conversations that need to be had. There's a narrative that has to happen, and we need to do something about it.
I think for me, the way forward, how I see it is, don't just see it as this fetish and wrong thing to do and all that, but also see it in the spiritual aspect of how much it can help people to discipline themselves.
What does it add to your journey?
Add to your journey, because don't look at it in terms of, and again, not use it as a tool to humiliate, not use it as a tool to take revenge on somebody, because partners can do that. There could be in a relationship, they would be like, okay, she's into it, no, so I can use that to get revenge on her, to go on extreme levels. And there have been instances of those type of things. So you have to understand that it comes from a mutual place of understanding.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's got to be pleasurable for both.
For both.
It can't be you getting a high out of being feeling powerful, right?
So that's why you need to understand who's the top and who's the bottom. There's these terms that they use like bottoms and tops and all this. So who's in control and who's the submissive person. These ground rules have to be laid out before you try these things out. You know, and the other thing is not view it in terms of like, you know, just only on sexual gratification, but also view it in terms of how much it adds on to you. Your person, like your personality, what it brings out.
Couple of, I think last year or something, I got a random DM on Instagram from somebody, and I don't know this space at all. No? So this guy sent me a DM asking if he can be my slave, right? I literally, honestly, kid you not, thought he was offering me free labor, right? It did not, and I was like, what, doesn't he think I can pay? Like how demeaning it is. Like, and then I actually said, no, I don't need a maid anyway, you know. But and also I don't believe in slavery because, you know, it's he's like, no, it's you know, your sexual, whatever he said, or something. Then I was like, oh Lord, and mea culpa, and I'm making this online because I'm probably representative of half of society out there, right? The first thing I did was I was disgusted because I was shocked, horrified, and I was like, oh my God, I thought it was depraved of him. And the next thing I did was a very bad thing. I took a screenshot. I put it up on Instagram and I put it up on Facebook. I covered his name, of course, but I said, oh my God, look at this. And yes, I did have like a whole community of people saying, oh my God, what are this and that, and calling him names and all sorts of things. Even though I hadn't identified who it was, I was mocking it, I was laughing at it, and I thought, ha ha ha, you know, how dare he. But then a friend of mine reached out to me and said, has he said anything like indecent to you? He's been very polite. He had been very polite, right? And he had asked you a question. Humility, humbleness, he had asked a question. He hasn't insulted you or called you names or whatever. It was just a question. So do you really need to bring him down as much? And it really made me think. It made me wonder like, oh, I have victimized somebody, whereas I was playing the victim here, right? I hadn't.
How much
That
guts
happens.
it would have taken
I
for you
hadn't
to get that
understood.
message?
Yeah,
I
that's
hadn't understood that side of things, and I did apologize to my friend also, because I think he was also part of that community, and I felt really bad, and then I took off the screenshot and all that, and I deleted all of that, and I realized that sometimes as society we do this. What we can't understand, we tend to belittle, dismiss, and mock, simply because it's not our way. Sometimes we might find that if we stopped and if we educated ourselves and if we try to be a little more empathetic, we might find that there are things that we haven't explored that we might enjoy, or we might find that it's all right for somebody else to enjoy it just because we can't, right? And there's nothing that's been taken away from you just because somebody else is engaging in a sexual lifestyle that you might not want for yourself. And that's kind of why we're doing this show. Just want to end with a little bit of fun though. Where do you get all your toys? Where do you find these things? You can't buy it in Sri Lanka, right?
When I go on tour with the band.
Overseas.
I'm not a materialistic person at all. What I like to do sometimes when I collect some cash is I get lost in the labyrinth of a bookstore and the labyrinth of an adult store. Those are the only two places I like.
Or a pet store.
Pet store, but I have pets now.
Yeah.
But I think now with the advent of
Harlem,
being able
so
to buy online buying and all that, there are people in Sri Lanka that I know are buying a lot of things online. Obviously with the pandemic it has stopped for a bit, but then even in Sri Lanka there's a few places that are like chikay that are coming out now and selling.
Around the corner here also, in fact. But,
No.
Yes. So slowly
who've improved their stocks.
Yes, improve their stocks.
So I've heard.
Yeah. And mostly I think a lot of people get this.
So you get like machines and stuff as well, right?
Yeah.
Like there are entire contraptions that I've seen online.
I love how you being the sweet ignorant one, Shanuki, how you
No,
are
I
going
researched.
such extreme
Hang on. Because I researched my show. Right?
And there are a lot of mathematics and there are a lot of tools. But very important thing before we
It's wrap up.
wrap up, what Shanuki said, I want to say this. When it comes to empathy and sympathy, there are plenty of people out there who judge people who are not like them, who judge people in our community, they judge people who are different from them, who don't have a shred or an iota of empathy. So don't judge a person's characteristic, a person's psyche, and a person's emotional stability based on kinks and fetishes. That's all I want to say.
Have respect for everyone's journey, whatever it may be.